The purpose of the meeting today is to walk through a specific model focused on product cost planning, production optimization, and product profitability management. This is Rob Harak with ACG. I'm here with Brian Cave, one of our TM1 solution architects. The two of us will walk you through the presentation. So the agenda today is we'll give a background overview of IBM Planning Analytics. We'll talk about some of the key new features and platform updates. We'll then go through the product profitability model demonstration, and we'll leave the end for discussion and next steps. So in terms of background, IBM Planning Analytics is the platform that has been released by IBM. I think it's about a year and a half ago. It started as a cloud-based platform. Essentially what it does, it combines the power of TM1 with some features from Cognos BI and Watson Analytics. The core analytical engine of TM1 has been enhanced and complemented by some of the visualizations from BI and some of the exploration capabilities of Watson to provide a more complete platform for planning, analytics, forecasting, reporting. So the model we built is based on that platform. In terms of some of the new features in planning analytics compared to TM1, which some of you may know as a legacy product, is a number of updates from a server perspective. So dynamic ability to create hierarchies and dimensions dynamically directly in the model. A bunch of kind of back-end optimization that improve the processing and the overall engine. There's a new Excel add-on, which is the green portion here. So for those who use Perspectives or Café in the past, Planning Analytics for Excel, or PAX in short, is the latest version. It's about 85% compatible with Perspectives. It closes some of the gaps that Café had to Perspectives, such as active forms and action buttons. And just the general look and feel and optimization for performance, it's really powerful, and it looks clean. It works pretty well. So we're actually pretty excited to see that. And the blue piece, the Workspace add-on. So what you're going to see today, a lot of the functionality is based on the new Workspace, which is a web-based, user-friendly visualization analytical interface. That really, if the TM1 model and the application is there, gives users a lot of flexibility and power to move things around and create their own views and customize analysis and create dashboards and things like that. From a platform perspective, the Planning Analytics platform was initially released on the cloud, so it was only available on the cloud up until December this year, December 2016. Effective this December, IBM released what's called Planning Analytics Local. So it's a local version, which essentially closes the gap to all the capabilities that were available online to local. So right now, companies have really chosen to be on-prem versus locally installed and have the full power of Planning Analytics available to them. So in terms of the model we're going to be showing you today, it's a very specific model that's based on a number of use cases that we had in the industrial/manufacturing space. It's really focused on a company that produces a number of products. And the three key elements to it are going to be planning for production and product costs. So essentially, driver-based plan for product cost, including raw material, direct labor, and production overhead. There's production optimization in terms of reallocating units based on capacity and cost. And then there's profitability management at the product level, so just showing how you can get transparency at the individual products and how you can make decisions based on some of the insight that you can get from the platform based on the granularity that's available. In terms of the objectives for the session, so obviously the first one is going to be walk through the model as is, and obviously it could be relevant for somebody who is in that space and has manufacturing costs or something of that nature. But at the same time, I understand that many of you on the phone will not necessarily relate to it given the industries that you are involved in. So the secondary objective is demonstrate the power of planning analytics just as a general. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to abstract from the model itself, if it's not necessarily applicable to you, but look at some of the options, the visualizations, the analytics, some of the capabilities, and hopefully relate it to some of your own use cases. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Brian, who's going to walk us through the model.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. So as of this point forward, we actually are inside Planning Analytics Workspace on the web. And looking at our first major screen here, this is our planning portal for our mythical company, Chalet Foods. What we're going to do is walk through several different sections of the screens in order. Where we're at right now is Chalet Foods has already done its initial pass on its 2016 budget. And so we're actually doing an evaluation and review of that in a second pass in order to address some issues and things where we think we can improve upon the initial results. In the planner portal, everything's pretty much point and click. The top half of our screen concerns the actual buildup of the components of our overall budget plan, whereas the second part on the bottom is centered around the analysis and review of the results. So we're going to walk through the top section first, where we've actually divided up into product setups in terms of product definition and unit price and volume entries, but then we also have cost breakdowns for raw material, labor, and production overhead. So we're just going to start in right away with the production definition. This just gives us an overview. Chalet Foods is a kind of a northeastern company specializing in dairy products. And as you can see here, this is our hierarchy by brand, category, and pack sizes. This is just for review so we can determine kind of the makeup of our current product set. In terms of the products we create, our material requirements actually enables us to specify the mix of raw material requirements that go into making each SKU. The values that we see here are all in terms of pounds per raw material, and the collective group of these go up to make 1 unit of each of our individual products. And to the right here, you can see in terms of the visualizations, we got a mixture on a number of our pages here of direct views of the data itself, the numbers, but also visualization showing us things like in this case here, what is our total material pounds for 2016 based on our product mix, but it's also bringing in things such as our total units to be produced. And we can also throw up on the same screen total material cost. In terms of easy navigation, we have a menu bar just to the side here. We can always return back to the main menu if we want, jump to anywhere else in our portal, or we can just move on to the next section just using the bar on the right. So now what we've done is moved on into unit price and volume. So right here we actually have our full year for 2016, again by our product. And what we can do here is put in our prices per unit across the year. And on the right side, we can actually determine, how are we doing for pricing versus prior year using a heat map that just lets us know where prices are fairly consistent or if we have some deltas either on a plus or minus side versus the prior year. The slider across the top lets us actually jump between our plants. We have 5 plants in the Northeast across 4 states. As we go across, we actually see that the prices are protected. That's just because we do all of our price inputs on a single basis, and then it gets applied automatically. As we're walking through this, just realize that what you're looking at collectively is about 6 different cubes of data that it's kind of seamless to you as to what that is. It's all just done through the separate screens and kind of comes together in our P&L in the end. From unit price, we move on to unit volume. Now we actually say what it is that we're going to produce. In this case here, we actually do have separate prices, separate volumes per plant, and we can just jump through each one and see the numbers that are done. Inputs can be done either on a manual basis to individual cell, but you actually have the capability using some shortcut keys to put in a large set of numbers at once, or we can even put numbers in at a summary level and have it allocate automatically downward. We'll actually be doing a demonstration of that a little bit later. And again, some graph visualizations just tell us in this case, when we look at our product set, turns out milk is actually by far our biggest category in terms of volume. Prince is our largest brand, and Durham, Connecticut is the largest of our plants in terms of production for 2016. I'm going to jump on to the next section now. So concerning raw materials, we saw the 4 raw materials before in our material requirements: milk, butter, goat milk, and non-fat dried milk. So in this screen here, we actually have our prices determined by 6-month contracts with the producers in the areas where the plants are. So in this case here, we don't have to put in prices for every month. We just put a single price in and it applies across the 6-month span. On the bottom here, again, some more visualizations. As we go from raw material to raw material, this kind of gives us an idea of what how the plans stack up against each other in terms of our 2016 pricing, and also how those prices compare to last year. So if I drop down from one to the next, we see our graph change telling us. One thing we're going to notice that's consistent, it's going to be a core part of our discussion when we start doing some analysis, is that Hershey and York are consistently our costliest plants to run, both in terms of raw materials, but also in terms of plant overhead. And that's pretty obvious, we can see here, in terms of our raw material price. Durham consistently actually is one of our cheapest in terms of our raw materials. The other forms in here are just basically ways to demonstrate that there's limitless ways that you can configure the environment for doing your updates. And in this case here, we just got very simplified input forms, just targeting the exact numbers that we want to put in without a lot of the other additional analysis around it. Moving on to labor, we have both fixed and variable labor that we need to worry about. In this case here, by plan, for fixed staff, we actually set up an allocation model where each plant has 4 primary production lines, and for this group of fixed staff members here, sanitation, maintenance, security, and safety, we just indicate how we're going to allocate those people across the individual product lines per plant. And at the top here, we can actually specify how many people that we're going to assign. Just to show a quick example of some input which we haven't done so far, if I just put in here and say that we want to put 20 people in here, that allocation drivers here automatically assign my people across the lines, and you probably saw the staff number here jump up for the Milford plant. We'll set that back again, just so we kind of stay consistent with the next reviews that we do. And again, if I go from plant to plant, everything will adjust to show me the appropriate things. In this case here, I'm keeping my visualization graphs kind of consistent so I can see the big picture, even while I'm going into the small details, plant by plant. Variable staff a little bit different. Instead of an allocation method, this is a direct input, much like our unit price and unit volume. Visualizations on the right tell us actually from a plant basis, York and Hershey are actually our outdated plants. It takes a lot of money to keep them running, and it also takes a lot of people to run the production lines there. So that's pretty obvious in the graph to the right here, our large number of staffing for variable staff there. We can also control the budget for our wage rates per person, per position. And again, we got some graphs that telling us if we look at a total staff level, again, we can see that Hershey and York, of course, far outpace everybody else. And at the bottom, again, Hershey and York are actually the top in terms of our labor costs as well. Benefit rates is, again, it's another driver. All of these are just drivers that we then use the model to calculate total salary, total benefit costs, which are then revealed again to these graphs on the right. So if we want, we can just change percentages or individual dollar amounts for our medical, dental, and pension. Moving on to plant overhead, production overhead. So the expenses, our fixed expenses for things like equipment maintenance, utilities, other admin expense by plant are also done using an allocation methodology. We determine how much we're going to allocate per line per plant. And then we actually input a single dollar figure for the year, which then gets allocated across the plant. And then since we're entering these numbers per year, we actually do use just an allocation method as well to then spread these numbers across the individual months. Looking to the right again, we can see definitely our equipment maintenance is our highest cost overall. And as always, Hershey and York are incurring our biggest prices overall, our biggest costs overall. Packaging is done on just a per case basis. So all we have to do is put in a price per case, per line, per plant. And then based on the unit volume that we enter, total packaging costs are calculated based off of that. So we have an indication of that at the bottom where we see that we're paying about $612,000 altogether for our packaging costs. Production capacity is pretty key for managing the plants and cost analysis. What we have here is each plant can support a certain amount of production that we call the standard capacity. And if needed to, it can go over that standard by a certain percentage on a per case, per line basis. When we look at the graphs at the right, the first two concerning standard and the bottom are extended, we actually see that we're heavily under-allocated with our unit volume and case volume in our first 3 plants, especially for our milk category production line. Whereas with things like Hershey and York, we're actually going over our standard capacity. All right, so that covers in a pretty quick way the initial overview of all of our costs and our revenue buildups. But now when we come down to the analysis sections, now we want to actually analyze what it is that we've got in our current plan. Summary P&L, we're looking at total Chalet Foods, and we've also got a brand and a category view. So when we look at our gross margin and our revenue, we're actually seeing that our revenue has dropped year over year. We're down about almost $6 million year over year. And our gross margin ratio is actually 47. It's down almost 6 whole percentage points versus prior year. This is not good. Our standard budget guidance is we want our gross margin to at least be above 50%. So that's something that we're going to be addressing as we walk through this. Cost of goods, we can see that in addition to the revenue being down, cost of goods is definitely up, and we have both increases in variable and fixed costs. Fixed costs has a larger percentage, but of course variable costs on a dollar basis is much higher, so that's where we're seeing the biggest impact, the $2.4 million increase year over year. The remaining graphs just tell us some additional information. We can see again that Prince and Caledona are our top brands by revenue, and milk and cheese are our top categories by revenue. The reports like the current and prior year revenue kind of just tells us again that the Caledona and Prince, our two biggest brands, are actually both suffering from a revenue decrease year over year, whereas our smaller brands actually do have a slight revenue uptick. And then margin, when we look here, we can actually see that Prince, again, is our biggest money maker, and it also has the best margin overall of all the brands. And from a category basis, milk and cheese have the best margins overall there. So now going on to P&L detail, we want to drill a little bit further down into what's driving this gross margin drop year over year. So we go to P&L detail. Now we're actually kind of looking a bit farther down into our P&L. And again, when we look at our variable costs, we know that we're down about 6% overall. Looking down the details below that, we see one of the biggest hits we get is the over $2 million hit, 7% from our material cost. Packaging is a negligent change, but we're also experiencing a big increase year over year in our variable labor. From a fixed cost perspective, we're up about $710,000 year over year, which is about a 7.7% increase. And the biggest hit from that is coming from our plant overhead. We do have a small uptick in fixed labor, but again, not too much versus what we're actually going over in terms of our plant overhead numbers. And our key cost drivers here, we can see material cost is definitely our biggest cost overall. And even on a year over year basis, we've actually got an increase in that material cost year over year. So now looking at a brand level at product profitability, so again we come back to our gross margin of the 47.1, and we look across our brands and we actually see that Green Farm is returning the least margin as we saw from that graph, and again Prince and Caledona are the highest. If we look at it on a plant basis, from what we already saw in our key cost inputs, Milford and Warwick are pretty high. They're up over the 50% target that we want. But when we go and look over at Hershey and York, we're actually 21% and 18%. So the outdated equipment in there, the high labor costs, they're definitely hitting us big time on our overall return on revenue. So how do we address that? One other thing we can look at real quick is we go here to plant profitability detail. Again, our P&L, we can actually look at the P&L detail plant by plant, but if we just look at this one overview chart here, this tells us a big story in one picture. Unit cost by plant. Overall, Durham is where we want to be producing. Hershey and York, overall, just cost us far too much per unit to make the product there. So what we want to look at doing is reallocating our unit volume as much as possible from these high-cost plants definitely over to Durham, but we can also make use of Milford and Warwick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our actual data input sections, and I go to unit volume. I'm going to jump over to Hershey, PA. What I'm going to do is modify my volumes at a summary level, but I don't want to do it against the current budget. What I want to do is a what-if scenario. So I don't want to commit to anything yet. I want to see the overall impact as I start making these changes without actually modifying my real budget numbers. So when I go up to the top of the view here, let me just redo that again. I might have done it a little fast. When I click on the report, you'll see this little bar at the top. When I click on that, I have a number of options for things that I can do within this report. If I hit the right button here, I actually have a view of all of the dimensions of my report. If I wanted to, I could rotate these, drill it, change the selection. That's not what we're doing right here, but a lot of flexibility in modifying how things look. What I want to do here right now, though, is look at my sandbox. This drop down that I have right here, I actually have alternate views of my budget. Base is the current one that we've been looking at. That's your primary budget. What I've got here is a 2016 alternate budget. Right now, this is initialized to be the same as the base budget. So what I'm going to do here now is I want to change my current unit volume plan for York and Hershey. So what I'm going to do here, instead of at a detail level, I'm just going to go right up to the top, total year, total milk category, and I'm going to revise this number from 2.8 million units down to 2 million. Now, a couple things happen when I do that. As soon as I enter the number, it took that summary result and spread it automatically across all the months and all the product detail on a same as proportional basis. Now, you'll also see that we have a set of blue numbers now. These blue numbers represent our what-if scenario. That's everything that was impacted by the change we made in the sandbox. Nothing down here changed because we're not working across these three categories at all. So I'm going to go pop over to York, and we're going to see in York, we still have the alternate sandbox as our budget basis, but there's no numbers have changed here because we haven't revised anything. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to take this down to 2 million. Okay, and then quickly, I'm just going to jump over to Durham now, and I'm going to gross this number up. Now, from Durham, we're going to do two things. Both because we're reallocating the volume from the two Pennsylvania plants, but we also know that we have the capacity on top of that to produce more in Durham because we're far under our standard capacity. And again, since Durham is actually cheapest in terms of material cost, we want to make as much product there as we can for the least amount of money. So let me see if I got this right. Okay, I did. So I'm grossing that number up to 6.5 million units overall. And I'm going to do changes as well to Milford and Warwick, because again, when we came back over and looked at our original production capacity, again, for the milk category, all three of these plants are underproducing. I'm going to come back over here and change both Milford and Warwick to produce not 600,000, 6 million. And again, it spreads down on the same as basis and tells me where my revisions are versus my original base numbers. Okay, so with that change done into our inputs, now we actually want to go and see what did that do to our P&L. So when I come back to the summary P&L page, I'm still looking at the original base numbers. So what I need to do here is revise my view to look at my sandbox. So a few things we see here. Now we see a lot of numbers in blue here, which is showing us our changes. Of course, last year we didn't change anything concerning last year, so that doesn't revise at all. Our revenue dropped, our change year over year. And if we look here, we used to have about a 4 or 5% change year over year for revenue. That number has now dropped down to 0.6 based on our change in units produced. But also, if we look at our gross margin ratio, we see that that's dropped a little bit as well, not just due to the revenue change, but we also had an impact on costs because we produced a lot more in the less costly plants. We'll go to P&L detail. I'm going to switch over again to our alternate view. So now rather than just looking at gross margin at a total, we actually look at the material costs. Okay, and we see a slight difference there from year over year. All right, so we're going to follow this through for a couple more steps. Again, we know that York and Hershey are problem areas. We've reduced the amount to be produced. Now that we're actually producing less, it's not going to cost us as much to run those plants. So we're going to come back over to our production overhead. And now that we're actually producing a lot less in the plants, we're actually going to reduce our cost for 2016 for equipment maintenance. I've just got to be careful with making sure my sandboxes are adjusted. So $500,000 for Hershey, $500,000 for York. Okay, Okay, and now we can see that drop in the equipment maintenance costs. I'll follow on that same theme. If I jump over to production capacity and also revise this to be looking at our sandbox, we actually see the impacts, we should have done this before, the impacts to our volume changes. So we're actually below our standard capacity for Hershey and York, that's fine. And now we're actually producing more than our standard capacity at the first 3 plants, but we're still remaining underneath the maximum extended capacity. If we wanted to, we could actually even produce a little bit more if we wanted to, without exceeding the maximum possible. So now coming back to our report, we'll just refresh again. And now we see that our gross margin ratio, we were at about almost 6% originally year over year, and at about 48%. We're now at 49.7%, in part due to the decrease in cost that we've done. There's one other thing that we want to do now, since we're not going to require as much in the 2 plants. I want to go to labor, and specifically to variable staff. And I no longer need as many people working on staff there as we previously had. So right now, as we said, we've got a very large variable staff working in these 2 plants, far exceeding the first 3. I'm going to drop the Hershey plant down from 93 heads down to 60, and I'm going to use one of our shortcut keys. I'm going to do a replace, which is actually going to say take this number and spread it across all the months, and then it's going to allocate it down from total variable labor through the model. And you can see the immediate impact in our numbers dropping here for total staff for Hershey. And I'm going to do the same thing for York. Again, I'll replace that using the shortcut key from 99 to 65 heads. Again, we see the immediate impact. And I did it again, didn't I? Hold on one sec. I did not switch over to the sandbox. Yeah, let me revert back real quick. And luckily enough, you know the right keys to do. It's extremely quick and easy. So replace back with 99. I'm going to switch over to my sandbox. So I do want to see the impact in my sandbox, not to my base P&L. Replace 65. Okay, now we see our blues. That makes us happy. And then we're going to replace our 60s with from our 93s. Okay, and then we return back once again to our P&L. All right, and actually variable labor had a huge impact. Now that we've modified the variable labor number for those 2 plants, we've actually gotten our gross margin ratio up above our target number. Now we're over 50, and we're actually at 51.7%. If we go and look at our detail, all right, we'll actually see variable labor year over year. Now we actually got a good drop year over year for our variable labor, and our materials cost still up there, but not as bad as it was overall. And again, partially offset now by the fact that we did increase our revenue with our additional production numbers. And again, if we come here and switch over, okay, and again, each one just gives us a better insight into how each of these plants are doing. If we look at Hershey, again, we're going to see a low number here. But again, since we've reallocated so much of our volume over, much more higher revenue and lower costs overall, so our margin for here is still holding up pretty high. In this case, Durham is at 66% margin overall. And then there's a number of other reports that we have in here: plant efficiency, labor cost, material analysis. Again, multiple ways of looking at the same thing at differing levels of detail. At this point, I actually want to show you a couple things that we can actually do concerning changing the content of your system overall from a structural basis. We actually have the ability in here to actually create, we've been looking at kind of our base standard hierarchy for brand and plant. You actually have the capability directly online to change the content of your hierarchies in your system. In this case here, I'm showing my primary product hierarchy, our brands coming down, and these are what we call the attributes. We have 1 gallon, we have 4 units per case. We actually have a brand manager that's managing this product group, and we have product category: milk, butter, cheese. What I'm actually going to do here is, using this screen, I can actually create a new hierarchy in my system just by right-clicking on an attribute. Oops, did I already create it? Okay, I forgot to remove it for the demo. All right, so we actually already have a product category in here. So actually, normally I would have shown you how we can create that, and this was actually done originally by doing that right-click, and it automatically figures out from the attribute the summary nodes that have to be created, and then moves all of the appropriate children under the hierarchy. Where something like this comes in useful is from a reporting basis. When I go to the hierarchy validation page, so our top hierarchy is our brand with our measures. Bottom report looks exactly the same. But now with the ability to create our own hierarchies on the fly, plus the flexibility in the tool, I can actually say that I want to add a related hierarchy to the report. In this case here, I want to see brand cross-category, something we can't do in the standard dimension. So once I've added that, I'm actually going to flip the report over. And now what it allows me to see now is for each of the brand Caledonia, Green Farm, and Prince, I can actually see as an intersecting dimension how much of each of these individual items we're making in terms of the gross margin and the revenue. A couple other features available in here. We're going to jump out for 1 second to an alternate tool that is part of the analytics platform. And what I'm in right now is I'm inside a standard Excel session, and what we have here is IBM Planning Analytics, which is PACS, Analytics for Excel. What I'm looking at here is the exact same data source that we've been looking at inside the workspace. You can see the large number of cubes that comprise that entire model that we've been looking at. And again, I create an exploration on the report. Now I pick from the product requirements cube, I've got a pre-configured view. I can do this from scratch, and I'm actually just using something I've already created before. And now I'm looking at the same data that we've been looking at inside the web, just in a different format. I have access to selectors here where I can change what I'm looking at, keep content, change content. I have full rotation capabilities. Okay, and if I chose to, I could actually say, you know what, I want to actually publish this document back into the same platform that we connect to with our web interface. So I'm going to override an existing document I already have up there. And just for demo purposes, we actually go here on our reference section. We have a PACS report. So the report that we're looking at here is actually something that we created from an initial exploration inside PACS. And then also you could just do a standard view, or inside PACS, we also then did a kind of a more formalized management report, insertions, column formatting, things like that to clean it up, give it a few headers. So again, you've got a lot of interplay, a lot of interaction that can take place between the multiple platforms available inside Planning Analytics. Other things that are available, you know, we could use a URL link to jump out to YouTube. In this case here, the Planning Analytics page for IBM. And something similar to that with just a bit more detail, we can actually set up a page inside the workspace with like links to articles on the web, other relevant websites that we might want to jump to. All right, so now we've been playing the whole time with our what-if scenario. I'm not going to do this here because I don't want to have to worry about going back later and resetting. But if you decide that all the changes you've done, you know, we love this 51.7% margin, that's where we want to be on our second pass of the budget. What you can do now with just a single click is actually say, I want to commit that. So once you actually say commit the data, it's going to take everything from our 2016 alternate budget sandbox and then apply it to our core base budget. And then that becomes now your de facto primary budget. All right, and I think that we've covered quite a bit there in a pretty short order. But again, lots of flexibility to do what you want. As you can see, I mean, everything from this page, which actually is no data at all. This is completely built using the standard analytic workspace editing tools. You don't have to do anything special or bring anything special in. And then when you actually go into the sub pages, again, everything here is all built just on a click and drag and type format. So there's no rocket science here. It's just kind of coming up with your idea of how you want things to look where you want things to go, and then you're actually on your way. At this point, I'm going to actually pass it back to Rob.
In closing, so we have spent a fair amount of time, obviously, playing with the platform and building, this demo and also other applications and conversions for existing customers. So there's, fair amount of lessons learned, a fair amount of gotchas in terms of how to do things, what the best practices are, what works and what doesn't, or what's the most optimal way to do that. So if there's any questions, my contact informations are on the screen. You can email, call, reach out to us. Even if you don't have any, it doesn't have to be a big project. If you're in the middle of something and you have a question, bounce it off. More than happy to answer and respond to the extent we can. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And if any questions, let us know. Otherwise, we'll look forward to talk to you soon.